Okay, everybody, get ready. Now comes the fun part. 24 drawers. We got everything ripped, we got to cross cut, we got to groove it, and then we got to join it. And as I'm going through this process, I put on the brakes and said, we got to shoot a video on this because this is great stuff. So as you see, I'm in midstream here, and I'm setting up. So get ready. I'm going to step you through my process of doing 24 drawer joinery. So I didn't want to bore you with all that ripping, but boy, you want to talk about an easy process, and I truly believe I calculated everything right. So we get 17 pieces. I'm going to correct myself because I wanted to use some of the offcuts on those lengths of 100 millimeter rips, and I get 8 pieces of 260. So if you follow me over here, this is what I was basically left with. I got another little narrow piece I was left to on those 3 sheets of plywood. So let's check out as I start to cross cut if my calculations were right. So as I grab a stick, I want to make sure you all understand this when you're cross cutting. I don't know that that's 90, and we know woodworking works off of 90. So yes, do I always use a hold down? I sure try. All right, I'm gonna bring it in. I'm gonna lock it down, and let's get a 90 on there. That's the beauty of the Capex. We got a great laser. All right, so let's get a 90. Okay, so as I do this, I always just mark my board, and that's where I start with 90. And you're gonna notice I started here. And these are my stops. On my fronts and backs are, if you remember, are 358. And I have this set at 533 for my sides. I verified that this morning, and I cut these pieces like this and verified the measurements. Because right now, I get some serious time in all this ripping and measuring and marking. So always take your time and verify. Let's get cutting. So let's start grooving. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna create this groove at the bottom of the drawer box stock to accept our 1/4" plywood, but you know it really isn't 1/4" plywood. It's undersized. So I set up an undersized 1/4" plywood bit already in my router table. So on the bottom of the cabinet, there's a recess, and we have to measure from the bottom of the cabinet to the top of the bottom. And that's how I'm going to set it. So we can set our router fence, and it's 19 millimeter. That way there it'll accept perfectly the undermount slides that we're using. So whenever I've set the depth of a groove or a dado, I always calculate basically half. So if this is 12 millimeter, I'm just going to take, and this is a piece I've had that I've purchased, and lo and behold, there you go, it's 6 millimeters of depth. So now I got to set this router bit up for depth. And what I did is I took a domino here and a 6 millimeter domino, and it's pretty simple. I'm just going to take it like this and raise it up so it's absolutely perfectly set at 6 millimeter. All right, so the easiest thing to do is get a piece of drawer box stock. You may have some kicking around, and set up your fence. So that bit's right there, that's your 6 millimeter or undersized plywood bit. And I set it up and I brought it in, and check it out. It runs just like that, right through. The height is right and that distance is right from here to here. Basically 12 millimeter. Now, if you're setting this up for the first time, I'll make a suggestion. Get some gauge blocks and make sure that the flute of the bit is perpendicular to the fence. And I have an 8 and a 4 here, so that adds up to 12. I'm pretty good at metric this morning. And I'll just take it like that, and I could set my fence right in there. So, setting it up the first time, if you don't have drawer box stock, use gauge blocks. And then, I've always suggested this over the years, save some for future setups. It makes it wicked easy. So always have scrap on hand to do some test passes on your router table to make sure you have everything set up. And then you can tweak it. But when I look at this, we are right where we want to be. From the bottom to the top, we're right where we need to be. Okay, and right here is perfect, and right here is perfect. One box down, 23 more to go. All right, so we did our ripping, we did our cross-cutting, we did our grooving. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do our joinery. And we're gonna put these together with Dominos. And we did a video not too long ago called Wicked Easy Drawers. I'll have the link in the description. You can go check it out. But I'm just gonna step through it really quick. I like to do through tenon joinery. And from the bottom of the drawer, I'm gonna go 37 using the flap, and from the top, I'm gonna use 20. I'll show you how to do this. We're gonna use, to do through tenon, we're gonna use a contrasting wood. These are the Sippo mahogany Dominos. So when we look at, follow me Chris with this, as we look at drawer box joinery, we got our front and back and two sides. And remember, your shear strength is your domino is going to go in here like this and like this. That way there, when you're pulling out the drawer, you won't pull the drawer apart. Okay, so let's step through the process. It's wicked easy. I'm going to show you some setups, and I'm going to show you basic labeling. So we want a perfectly flush joint here with two tenons poking through tenon. So what I always suggest until you get in rhythm, now we got 18 of the 100mm tall drawers and 6 of the 260, I think it is, or 270, 10¼ inches depth. We get 6 of those. That's a lot of joinery. You can get turned around real quick. I'll show you a great way to orientate and set up your clamping to get this done very easy. But what I suggest at the beginning is mark the faces here where the plate of the the domino joiner is going to go. Okay, here we're going to plunge horizontal, and here we're going to plunge vertical. But I'll show you that I like to plunge from the outside in on this drawer box material because that top veneer has a tendency to tear out. As we're doing this, this will make sense. So let's go over here and get clamping and get joining. So let's avoid the mistakes. I have 18 of the 100mm tall, 6 of the 260 tall drawers. That's a lot of joinery. That's a lot of repetitive mortises. So if you look at the beauty of the MFT with the clamping system I have here, okay, I have these low profile stops set up, okay. Now, when you look at this, it's gonna be super easy because what I've done, come in here, camera guy. Look, see how I've orientated all my grooves one way? So I can go boom, 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 boom with the flap, flip the stop, the 20mm, go this way. And then what I'll do, and you'll see this, is I just take it like this, and I have this bridge clamp like this. I flip it around and do the exact same thing. And if you orientate your boards like this, so these are my fronts and backs, these are my sides, it can go wicked quick. But don't get confused and make sure everything gets orientated right off. And if you need to label everything, just do it. So we're gonna use a 5x30 domino tenon. A couple things we need to do to set up the machine. Now remember, every single one of these joints or mortises are going to be in a tight setting because we're going to rely on the precision of the machine. So I checked this morning, I got a 5mm cutter in there. That's the thickness and the glue line. I also got to set my plate. I'm going to remove the gauge block out, bottom it out. It automatically sets at 6mm. And we're going to set our plunge depth. It's a 5x30. 30, half of 30 is? Bing, 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 15. So I'm just going to set my plunge depth at 15. And we're ready to rock and roll. So we got to rely on the precision of the machine because all the mortises are tight. So we're gonna put 2 tenons in here. Now, if I use these flaps right here, okay, that puts us 37 to the center. Your side of the box would look something like this. 37 from the top, 37 from the bottom. It just doesn't look pleasing to the eye. So what I like to do is I like to put the support bracket on here, and I like to place from the bottom where the groove is, use the flap 37, and then if you noticed here, this is why I choose to use the support bracket that comes with the domino joiner, because it has this little wing here that you flips out, and the distance from here to now the center, when I use this, is 20. So that makes it a little, when you open up the side of the drawer and look at it, it looks just right on. Okay, now here's a safety tip, and please listen carefully. When I go, you notice the machine's completely off? When I go to flip this back and forth, and listen, you're doing a lot of drawers, you want to leave it running, do not, because that bit is coming right to the face even though it's completely retracted, and it's a real safety hazard. So make sure when you are flipping this in and out that the machine's completely off. Let's go from the 20. So once again, it's really quick once you get going like this by flipping, and just to see how this is right in the center, and I can just have that quick reference point just like that. And now the groove is on this side, so I'm going to use the flap now going this way. So remember how earlier I labeled this board V to plunge vertical? Well, because it's a through tenon, if I plunge from the inside to the outside, guess what? I'll have a boatload of tear out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the outside in vertically using the flap and the 20 millimeter flap. Okay, but I'm going to flip it over, and once again, I'm going to orientate all my boards the same so I can plunge vertically all the way. Now, if there's any tear out, you won't see it because the front and back will cover up the tear out that happens on the inside. So every time I do a full run of drawer boxes, I take one of them, and I'll call this the back, and what we're going to do is we're going to rip off from here to the top, and that'll allow us room for the Sedgeley undermount drawer slides that we have, instead of putting it all together with the bottom and then making a notch. It's just so much easier. So when you set your fence, you got to be very careful, because I could take this measurement here, and you got to do it from the bottom to the very top of the groove, and that's basically 20 millimeters. So you set your fence. In other words, you have to incorporate the curve of your blade. Okay, so for the tallest stock, the 260 millimeter, 10 1/4. We're gonna do the exact same thing as we did for the 100mm stock. But we're gonna do a 20 from the top, a 37 from the bottom. And then after glue up, we'll do a full plunge through and tack in another domino right in the center. But I wanna take the measurement after glue up, and you'll see. Stay tuned to the end of the video. So you think you're ready for glue up? It's time to dry fit, so I'm gonna give you some tips and tricks on that. So remember when we plunge from the outside in and it gives you little or no tear out, right? The tear out and what I call the fuzz is on the inside. Now, I'll show you a tip on that, but you know what? Make sure you have a sharp bit in there because you're still gonna get a little bit of tear out, but that's fine. So there's a couple things I do. First, I take a sanding block, okay, and I get rid of most of that fuzz. That way that will butt perfectly on there. Ooh, like this. Next, I'll actually do it from the front too, just to make sure, and be done with it. So here's a tip. The domino tenon, okay, is really a super tight fit, sometimes too tight. So what I like to do is on each of the tenons, you'll see there's a little rib here and here. I never sand this or this face. That's my glue line. And you'll see there's a little herringbone design in there, and that's called a glue well. And there'll be more of that in a moment. So what I'm gonna do is take my block plane and shave off on either side the same amount. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for dry fitting, I'll take it and I'll hammer it. Okay, so it just protrudes on the inside. You'll see in a moment why I'm doing that. And I'll put all 8 of them in to the sides, okay? So let's put the box together and see how we did. So groove to groove, I'm going to take it and look how that just fits in there. So that'll be my front, obviously, and 37, so I know that, and I ripped off the bottom, so I know this is my back, and that's exactly what we're looking for. So I just pound it flush like this, and you'll see really quick, see how that's perfectly flush there, and that's what we're trying to achieve. All right, so we have it in dry fit right now, and everything looks great. So we ripped off from the back piece here, we ripped it off so everything is even, and after glue up, we'll just slip our bottoms in. Now, we have to measure for our bottoms while we're cutting. So let's figure that out, and it's wicked easy. What I like to do is take a folding ruler, stick it in the groove. We remember I made it 6mm deep, the groove, but I'm reading out at about 370mm, but I don't want it too tight on the width. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna subtract 2mm, and we're gonna rip 368mm pieces out of a 4x8 piece, so we'll get, let's figure that out, we'll get 3 pieces per sheet. Now, what I want to do is measure, so I have enough material. I know I do, but I want to show you. I'm going to measure here, and we're at 500 in length, 528. And I stick the folding ruler right into the groove. So I'm going to cross cut at about 527. I'll subtract a millimeter. Because what we're gonna do, because it's undermount slides, we're not gonna notch, we're just gonna make it flush. I'll put a couple screws in here, we'll have a floating bottom. So let's figure that out. At 527, that means I'll get 4 per rip. So 3 rips times 4 cross cuts. Oh my goodness. We're gonna get, what? 12 rips. So that means, I'm so glad I bought those 2 sheets. a 4x8 because we're doing 24 drawers, remember? So we go with our regular setup with my MFT to cut the drawer box bottoms, because remember the measurement on the crosscut is 368 millimeters, where the Capex will only handle a 300 millimeter or 12-inch crosscut. So I set up my MFT, I got my STM 1800 and my other MFT for my out supports, and let's get cross-cutting. So you can see once you have all your measurements right, it just goes wicked quick. So all the bottoms are cut, and the next step is glue up. So I took the dry fit apart. Okay, we're getting ready for glue up. And I want to make sure my whole area is prepared properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those tenons that were perfectly flush, and I'm going to pop them back out so they look like this. And you'll understand my method in a few minutes, just like this, okay? Because that's where we're going to apply glue. So one of the things I want to make sure when you're going into glue up is make sure you have everything readily at hand. That way there you're not freaking out. Make sure all your material's prepped. You got your glue, you got your water, you got a damp rag that's completely wrung out, and you got a piece to pound things flat with your dead blow hammer. We're ready to get going. Because this is raw plywood, I am going to put a little bit of glue here, okay? And just a little's a lot when it comes to glue. All right, I'm going to set that there, and then I'm going to say, okay, over here, this is going to be my front groove to groove, so I'll apply it to this face, just like this, okay? We'll slip our, after glue up, we'll slip our bottom in afterwards. Now, because I mentioned earlier, you have that little herringbone design in there, those are glue wells, and I have put together tons of drawers like this. Now, when I use pre-finished, okay, not raw plywood, I don't use any glue on that face. I rely on the Dominos, and I've never had a failure. But I always do this, watch. I put a little like that, and you'll see that when I pound it in, it wicks to the adjacent surface. You'll see how all this goes together, and I'll flip it over. And remember, a little's a lot when it comes to wood glue. And that's just flowing nice. And I'll just take it like this, put it on there like that, and like that. And one of the things I like to do with that damp rag is make sure my surface is completely clean. That way there's less sanding to do. So let's see if I have this orientation right. I'll take it just like this, and that's exactly how I want it. I'll bring it around like this, and this is my back, okay? And that's going in just nice like this. And then I'm gonna take this, and as I pound it, it goes in. I'll make sure I do that, and I just wipe it off like this. Absolutely perfect. I check in here as well and get all that drip. The next one I'm gonna put in is pretty simple. I have that glue on there. If I needed to re-wet it, which I don't, I'll just take it like this. And sometimes I'll have this like this just to pound it perfectly flush, but I don't need to because those are setting just right. Always wiping my mallet so I don't have excessive squeeze out or contamination with the glue. In other words, there's a lot of times I barely have to what? Sand. If I can avoid that, I'm a happy camper. Okay, so let's do this piece now. And then guess what? I'm just applying it here, and doing my rounds like this on that. And as I tamp it together, once again, it wicks to the adjacent surface. And just a couple of K-body clamps to get her good. And it's that easy. The beauty of K-bodies, it keeps everything square. And you don't need a ton of pressure. And I'll just wipe remaining squeeze out, and there's not a lot. And we'll just let it set up and tack up. Now, if you do want to put the bottom in there to make sure it's square, you can do that as well. I just don't screw it in yet. So there's one. 17 more of these 100 millimeter tall to do and glue up. And then we get 6 of the larger ones. But let me show you the technique to put the center tenon in that 260 millimeter drawer box. All right, so here's a technique I like showing everybody. So from the bottom to here it's 37, remember that. From the top to here in the center is 20. So let's measure in between. And if I measure that from that shoulder of the tenon to that shoulder is 186 millimeters. Divide that in 2 and what do you get? 93. Hey, I'm pretty good at this metric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a tick mark right here at 93 millimeter. Okay, and then I'll take a measurement from the bottom, and if I'm right, that's 138. So from the bottom to that line is 138. And I'll mark that line all the way around the board, just like this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave my setting for that 1/2 inch material, 6 millimeters, utilizing the plate. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this piece, the support bracket. And I'm going to put on my TSO Bigfoot, because that gives me a very large base up top here. The other reason I like the Bigfoot is because I have that precise cursor at center line of my domino tenon. So I take that now and I set my plunge depth, because I got to go through the 12 millimeter plywood into that other material. Remember, it's a 5x30 domino. It's not exactly 5x30, it's a little shorter. But with the 5 millimeter cutter, you have that little fluting at the end. Okay, so you don't get exactly 28 plunge depth on it. Okay, remember that cursor can line up perfectly and precisely. But also, because of the 28 and that fluting, when you plunge, you'll feel it bottom out. That's fine. I'll show you a really cool tip on that. So pretty simple. Once again, I've knocked the rib off that domino. I just take it, and we call this buttering the domino. Get it nice and lubricated. It acts as a lubricant as you tack it in. Always have that rag near you, and that is wicking to the adjacent surface, and you're gonna feel it bottom out. That's fine, okay, because what happens is after that dries, about a half hour, 45 minutes, I always give it plenty of time, we're gonna take a flush trim saw and just trim it close to flush and then sand it flush. And you'll see how slick that looks, and look how it's perfectly spaced in between. So make sure you have a true flush cut saw. And when I check that, and I can run, this has a Japanese set to it, but there's no set. So when I put it on here, it doesn't rub or cut into that veneered plywood. So I can take that just like this, okay, and cut that flush. So we're almost there. What I want to do is I want to take these 2 screws and put them in right toward the middle, but I want to eyeball it just right. So I know this is 12 millimeters, so half of that, if I'm correct, half of 12 is what? 6. So I'm just going to take this and do a quick layout line. Set that aside. I'm going to countersink first. Sometimes a little attention to detail makes it easy. Just real quick, let me countersink that a little bit more. And let's drive these These are just leftover square drives I have. And we'll just, and look at that, nice and flush. And another one here. And that bottom is not going anywhere. So there you go. So hopefully you followed along and saw the technique of through tenon joinery with the domino joiner. We have 24 of these to put together to glue up and process. But next time, on the next segment of the miter saw station, we will be assembling with our undermount slides into our carcasses. So, as we always say in the SedgeTool shop, be positive, stay sharp, and we mean wicked sharp.